The alarm on Marcus Webb's phone went off at 5:15 in the morning, the same as every other day. He silenced it before the second ring could wake Jacob. Then he swung his legs off the couch that doubled as his bed. He stood in the dark of the apartment listening. Just listening. For any sound from the back room. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator. Just the distant sound of traffic beginning on the street below. Jacob was still asleep. Marcus had maybe an hour. An hour to get his 6-year-old son dressed. To get him fed. To get himself out the door for the first shift of the day. He moved quietly to the kitchen. He started the coffee. While it brewed the old Mr. Coffee machine, ancient and reliable, he walked to the cabinet beside the sink. His hand found the edge of the duct tape. The tape that held the small manila envelope to the inside of the cabinet door. He'd been taping money there for 3 years now, ever since his ex-wife had left, ever since custody had shifted to him, ever since he'd realized that every single penny had to count. He pulled the envelope down carefully, as if it might break. $47. That was what was left. Rent was due on Friday. It was Tuesday. He'd already picked up 1 extra shift at the flower shop this week. He had another Thursday morning scheduled at the retail store where he worked the evening shift 3 nights a week. But Thursday felt very far away. When you were holding $47. When you were thinking about Friday. When your landlord would be waiting for the full $1,200, and there was no magic that would stretch $47 that far. Marcus put the envelope back. He taped it carefully, and turned his attention to breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast from the bread that was just starting to go a little hard at the edges, and orange juice that he diluted with water. Because Jacob never noticed, and Marcus had stopped feeling guilty about it somewhere around year 2 of doing this. The boy came padding out at 6:10, still half asleep. His hair standing up in directions that defied physics. He was wearing the dinosaur shirt, the one he'd worn for 3 days in a row, because it was his favorite. And laundry only happened on Sundays, morning buddy Marcus said. And Jacob collapsed into the kitchen chair, with the gravity of a much older, much more exhausted human. "I'm hungry," Jacob announced, which was Jacob's way of saying good morning. Marcus set the plate in front of him. "Eggs and toast. Eat up." Jacob ate what was put in front of him without complaint. He always said thank you when he was done. That alone made Marcus feel like he was doing something right. Even on mornings like this one, when the envelope upstairs held $47, when everything felt like it was held together with duct tape and prayer. It was at 6:42, just as Marcus was pulling his second sock on the one with the small hole near the heel that he kept meaning to sew and never did that, his phone rang. The name on the screen, Marcus at Petals and Stems. Marcus answered before the first ring could fully complete. "Hey, Marcus." The voice on the other end was apologetic and hoarse. Derek called out sick. "I need someone to run the Sterling Group delivery before 9 o'clock. It's a prepaid order. Been in the system for years. Special instructions. The client who placed it, he's gone now. Passed last year. But his attorney set it up on a timer. Today's the day it goes out." Marcus looked at the clock on the wall. 6:42 a.m. He looked at the door to the back room, where Jacob was still finishing his breakfast. He had nowhere to take Jacob. His neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, had a doctor's appointment, and the sitter they sometimes used was in school herself on Tuesday mornings. "I can do it," Marcus said. "I'll have to bring my son." A pause on the other end. Marcus could hear the flower shop's ambient sounds in the background, the coolers humming, the gentle trickle of water in the hydration station. "It's Sterling Group," Marcus said at the pause. "The main tower, Violet Sterling's office." Another pause. Longer this time. "All right," the voice said finally. "But Marcus, whatever you do, don't lose the card." The attorney was very specific. "The card has to reach the CEO directly." Marcus hung up and looked around the apartment. 6:43 a.m. He had to be downtown with flowers in hand before 9 a.m. He'd heard of Sterling Dynamics, of course. Everyone in Boston had heard of it. The company took up an entire downtown tower. It was in the news all the time. Merger talks, expansion plans, that kind of thing. His ex-wife had worked there once, briefly, back when they were still together. She'd lasted 3 months, before the schedule and the demands and the general atmosphere had eaten away at her mental health. To the point where Marcus had finally sat her down and said, "You have to leave that place. You're not supposed to feel like this." She had left. The company anyway. She'd left Marcus about 18 months after that, though Marcus tried not to draw direct lines between events that probably didn't have any connection. "Jacob," he called out, "we need to get dressed. We're going on an adventure." Alexandra Harmon had been awake since 3:47 in the morning. She hadn't intended to be awake. She'd set her phone on Do Not Disturb at 11 p.m. She'd put on the one pillow that had belonged to her father. The pillow that still, despite 14 months of washing and the passage of time, carried the faintest echo of his office. That particular combination of expensive leather, the paper of important documents, something woodsy that she could never quite identify. She'd gotten into bed with the specific intention of sleeping 8 hours, like a functional human being. At 3:47, she had given up. She'd been staring at her ceiling for 4 hours, before she finally got up and showered. She'd gotten dressed in the dark. By 6:30, when she arrived at her office on the 47th floor of Sterling Dynamics, her assistant, Hannah Price, had already been at her desk for an hour. This was never a good sign. Hannah looked up as Alexandra approached, and her expression confirmed what the early arrival already suggested. The news was bad. "The board briefings are printed," Hannah said, holding out a stack of folders sorted by priority. "Yellow flag is on top." Alexandra took the folders. The yellow flag was for high-priority, time-sensitive items. Today's yellow flag was the board meeting at 11 a.m. She didn't need to read it to know what it said. She already knew. Richard Canton, the company's chief financial officer, had been pushing for weeks now to negotiate a partial sale of operational control to an outside investment group. He said the numbers demanded it. He said there was no other path forward. He said this with the smooth, measured confidence of a man who had never been told he was wrong. And that particular quality in Richard had lately begun to unsettle Alexandra, in ways she hadn't fully named yet. She was 27 years old, and running a logistics and supply chain company worth several $100 million. She was very good at it. And she was exhausted in a way that sleep alone couldn't fix. Alexandra poured a cup of coffee from the pot Hannah always had ready. She walked to the window. The city below was still dark, just beginning to show the pale gray suggestion of dawn. Somewhere in the building's 40-year history, on a day that must have felt as gray as this one, her father had made a decision that saved the company. She'd never found out exactly what that decision was. He'd written about it once, in a letter he never sent. A letter Alexandra had found in his desk drawer, the week after his funeral. "The choice that cost me the most," the letter said, "was always the one I avoided the longest." She had read that line many times since. She still wasn't sure she understood it. Richard Canton appeared in her office at 8:15 a.m. He was already wearing his confidence like a suit that fit him perfectly. He sat across from her without being asked. He set his own coffee on her desk and started talking about acquisition terms. Alexandra listened. She didn't interrupt. She'd learned a long time ago that interrupting made you seem defensive. And defensive was the same as desperate in a boardroom. And desperate was the same as done. "The board is leaning toward the proposal," Richard said. "Connor and Patricia are already aligned. We just need 2 more votes." Alexandra looked at him steadily. Not with the pity he would have hated, not with anger, just with the particular attention of someone who had been watching him carefully, and arrived at a conclusion she was willing to act on. But not yet. "I want to review the acquisition terms once more," she said. Richard smiled. He thought he'd won. He probably had. Marcus picked up the arrangement from the back room of Petals and Stems at 7:30 a.m. It was not like the other bouquets that came through the flower shop most days. Most of what Marcus handled was the standard grocery store rows of color, reds and pinks, and the occasional white, all wrapped in cellophane with a price sticker that showed they'd been forgotten about until the last minute. Birthday flowers, anniversary flowers, I messed up flowers. This was different. The arrangement was white flowers densely packed, the kind that were arranged by someone who actually knew what they were doing. The stems were cut at precise angles. The foliage was balanced, and wrapped around the whole thing was a dark blue ribbon, knotted twice. Not once, but twice. As if whoever had created this had wanted to make absolutely sure it wouldn't come undone. At the center of the ribbon, tucked rather than attached, was a small ivory envelope, sealed with silver wax pressed into a shield shape that Marcus didn't recognize. When Marcus picked up the arrangement from the back of the shop, it felt heavier than it looked. He held it carefully, the same way he used to handle calibration reports back at his old job. The kind of documents where a single misread line could cost someone very badly. He'd learned precision at that job. He'd also learned what happened when you caught something your bosses didn't want caught. Jacob came into the flower shop already wearing his winter coat, pulled on over his pajama top. He'd insisted on wearing it that way, and Marcus hadn't had time to argue about it. The boy had grabbed his small red toy car from the shelf by the door, the one with the missing back wheel that he'd had since he was 4 years old, and tucked it carefully into his coat pocket. "Are we going far?" Jacob asked, looking at the bouquet. "Not far," Marcus said. "Downtown. We're going to deliver some flowers and come right back." "Do flowers like the rain?" Marcus looked at his son. Rain was coming down steadily outside the flower shop windows. Marcus had checked the weather. It would be raining all morning. "Some of them do," Marcus said. Jacob considered this for a moment, with the seriousness of a child who takes all information very literally and very seriously. "I'll hold the umbrella," Jacob said. They walked 2 blocks to the bus stop. They stood under the shelter while the rain came down in steady sheets. Marcus kept the bouquet under his jacket as much as he could, one arm curved around it, the other hand holding Jacob's. The boy didn't complain about the cold, or the wet, or the early hour. He just stood there holding his little red car, and watching the puddles form on the pavement, as though they were something worth watching, something important, something that deserved his full attention. The bus came. They got on. Marcus sat by the window with the flowers carefully held. Jacob pressed against his side, his small face turned toward the window, watching the city wake up around them. Neither of them knew what was coming. The Sterling Dynamics lobby was the kind of space that made most people feel smaller than they were. Marble floors so polished they reflected light like mirrors. 2 stories of glass. Potted trees that had probably been standing in the same positions for longer than some of the staff had worked there. The reception desk was a curved slab of pale stone, staffed by 2 women in matching dark blazers. They had mastered the art of looking politely dismissive, the special expression that people who work in very expensive buildings develop. The expression that says, "I can help you, but you probably don't belong here." Marcus pushed through the revolving door at 8:41 a.m. and paused just inside to shake the rain off his jacket. With one free hand, he had the bouquet in the other. His jeans were damp. His jacket, the good one he kept for job interviews he never went to, clung to his shoulders. Jacob came through the door behind him and immediately stepped closer to his father's side, looking up at the space with wide, careful eyes. The boy understood on some instinctive level that Marcus couldn't quite explain, that this was a place where people like them didn't belong. The woman at the reception desk looked up. Her expression was neutral in the way that meant she had already made a judgment. Wrong shoes, wrong clothes, wrong father. "Can I help you?" she asked. Delivery for Alexandra Harmon, Marcus said. Prepaid order from Petals and Stems. Deliveries go to the mailroom on the second floor. I have specific instructions that this goes to Miss Harmon directly, Marcus said, carefully. It's a personal item, not a standard order. The woman at the desk exchanged a brief look with her colleague. It was the kind of look that said they'd seen this before. Men who showed up without appointments, who said things like personal item and specific instructions, who had decent enough faces, but wrong-looking shoes, who wanted to deliver flowers or letters or explanations to women who had moved far enough up in the world, that they no longer had to accept deliveries from men like this. I can call the mailroom, the first receptionist said, already reaching for the phone. That's when Mason Reed appeared. He came from the corridor to the left, moving with the particular ease of a man used to being obeyed. He was the head of building security, broad across the shoulders, and he moved like someone for whom resistance had never really been an option. Security people always did. They'd learned confidence the hard way, by being told that they were the authority, and by watching people defer to them because they were wearing the right uniform. Mason looked at Marcus, then at the bouquet, then at Jacob. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to need you to step outside." "I have a delivery," Marcus said. His voice was calm. He'd practiced this tone during the 18 months since his ex-wife had left. The tone of a man who wasn't going to argue, who wasn't going to make a scene, who was going to be reasonable. "I don't care about the delivery," Mason said. "I care that you leave, now." Jacob's hand tightened in Marcus's grip. The boy was watching the interaction with the particular attention that children give to moments they sense matter, moments that their fathers' faces tell them are important, even if the words don't quite explain why. "There's something you should know," Marcus said quietly. "The card." "I don't need to know anything," Mason interrupted. "I need you to leave the building. Right now, or I will remove you." Marcus looked at his son. He looked at the flower bouquet in his arms. He looked at the sealed card, still wrapped in its dark blue ribbon, still intact, still carrying whatever message the attorney had deemed important enough to set a timer on, 14 months ago. He made a decision then, the kind of quiet decision that doesn't announce itself, that parents make all the time. The kind of decision that said, "This is not the battle. This is not the moment. This is the moment when I protect my son from watching his father get dragged out of a building." He nodded slowly. "Come on, buddy," he said to Jacob. "We tried." As he turned to leave, Mason called after him, not in anger, but in the tone of someone who had just realized he'd made a choice he might regret. "The flowers," Mason said. "You almost left without them." Marcus turned back and took the arrangement from where he'd set it on the edge of the marble reception counter. He held it against his chest and walked toward the door. Jacob's small hand in his. The revolving door spun them out into the rain. Alexandra was still in the board meeting when Hannah appeared at the door. Hannah never appeared during board meetings. It was a rule, an unbreakable, ironclad rule. That had been established the day Alexandra became CEO. Board meetings were sacred time. No interruptions, no exceptions, which meant something had happened. Alexandra excused herself and followed Hannah into the hallway. "There was a delivery this morning," Hannah said quietly. "A bouquet. A man with a child tried to bring it to your office. Security asked him to leave. He left without incident." Alexandra felt something still inside her chest. "What kind of delivery?" she asked. "White flowers," Hannah said. "The receptionist said they were beautiful. The card fell to the floor, but security never got it. The man took the flowers and left. Did anyone get his name? No. But the receptionist said he wasn't angry. He was just sad about it." Alexandra looked back at the conference room. Through the glass walls, she could see Richard Canton leaning back in his chair, confident, unquestioned, already planning the ways he would dismantle her father's legacy. Once the board voted, "Find him," Alexandra said suddenly. "Find out who made that delivery. I need to know his name. I need to know what company he was from. I need to know everything." Hannah was very still. "That's not typical Alexandra," she said carefully. "That's not a proportionate response to a missed delivery." Alexandra was aware distantly that her assistant was right. That asking security to hunt down a delivery man because a bouquet didn't arrive was not the response of a CEO thinking clearly. It was the response of a woman who had just felt something shift inside her, some small thing that had been asleep since her father died. 14 months ago. "Do it anyway," Alexandra said. She went back into the board meeting, but she didn't hear what Richard was saying anymore. She was thinking about flowers. She was thinking about a card that had fallen to the marble floor. She was thinking about a child standing close to a man's side, watching something important happen. She was thinking about her father's letter. The choice that costs you the most is always the one you avoid the longest. And for the first time, she wondered if that choice was happening right now. In a moment she wasn't even present for. Marcus didn't go to his afternoon retail shift. He called in sick, which wasn't entirely a lie. His stomach had been twisted since he left Sterling Dynamics, and his head hurt in that particular way that came from adrenaline and fear mixing together. He and Jacob rode the bus home in silence. The boy was quiet in that particular way he got when he understood his father needed quiet. Some deep instinct in him reading the situation and responding appropriately. At home, Marcus put Jacob down for a rest time. The boy was asleep within minutes. And then he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He sat at the kitchen table and held the bouquet. The flowers were still perfect. They hadn't wilted. The stems were still rigid. The white petals were still unblemished. Whatever had happened in that lobby, whatever Mason Reed had planned to do, the bouquet itself had survived intact. Marcus set it carefully on the table and stared at it while the afternoon light moved across the kitchen. 3 years. 3 years since the day he'd filed the compliance report. He'd been working in analytics at Sterling Dynamics back then. A good job, the kind of job that paid the bills, and let him believe that things might work out for him, that he'd made the right choices in life. He'd been married still. His wife had been saying things about how maybe the marriage wasn't working, but they were still in the range of, maybe we should go to counseling, rather than I'm leaving. So Marcus had been thinking they still had time. Then he'd been reviewing supply chain data as part of a routine audit. And he'd noticed something. It was small, the kind of thing that most people would gloss over, the kind of discrepancy that could be explained by rounding errors, or outdated spreadsheets, or a dozen other things that weren't anyone's fault. But Marcus had always been good with numbers. He saw patterns. He saw things that didn't quite add up. He dug deeper, and the deeper he'd dug, the more he'd found. Richard Canton, who was then a rising executive, had been moving money, not stealing it. The company was too big and too audited for outright theft to work. But shifting it, hiding it, reclassifying it under labels that made it invisible to the standard quarterly reviews. Marcus had estimated that over a 2-year period, Canton had hidden something in the range of $3 million. He'd gone to his supervisor. His supervisor had gone quiet, in a way that meant he understood the gravity of what Marcus had found, and also understood that there were reasons nobody was supposed to find it. "You're sure about this?" his supervisor had asked. I'm sure Marcus had said. His supervisor had said, "Let me take it to Richard. Let him explain it before we escalate." Marcus should have known better, but he was still young enough then to believe that the right answer was always the right answer, that doing the right thing was always better than protecting yourself. Richard had gone very quiet when Marcus presented the numbers. He'd looked at the spreadsheets. He'd asked clarifying questions. And then he'd said, "This is incorrect analysis. You've misread the data. Canyon is a legitimate strategic initiative. It requires exactly this kind of reclassification. Richard had explained it in such smooth, confident terms that Marcus had felt his own certainty start to waver. Maybe he had misread it. Maybe he wasn't as good with numbers as he thought. But he'd gone back and checked again, and checked a third time. He'd been right. He'd written a formal compliance report. He'd submitted it through the proper channels. He'd done everything exactly right. 3 weeks later, Richard Canton had visited his cubicle. Richard had been very friendly. He'd put a hand on Marcus's shoulder and explained in a voice full of regret and understanding, "The company needs to let you go. You're creating a hostile work environment. People are feeling uncomfortable. We can't have that kind of disruption." "I filed a compliance report," Marcus had said. "That's protected. You can't fire me for that." Richard had smiled. "We're not firing you for that," he'd said. "We're firing you for insubordination and creating a hostile work environment. But I'll tell you what, if you leave quietly, we'll give you a severance package and a good reference. You just have to agree not to discuss this matter with anyone." Marcus had needed to eat. He'd needed to keep his apartment. He'd had a wife then, though not for much longer. He'd signed the papers and left. The compliance report had been filed away somewhere in the system, and it had stayed there, ignored and forgotten, and actively suppressed by a man who had the power to suppress it. Until now, until a bouquet of white flowers had arrived at his door, with a sealed envelope that he still didn't know the contents of. Marcus looked at the flowers sitting on his kitchen table and felt something turn over inside his chest. Something that might have been hope, or might have been fear, or might have been the two of them tangled together so tightly he couldn't tell them apart. Hannah found Marcus's information by 4 p.m. She'd started with the flower shop, called them, explained she was trying to locate a delivery person, asked them to check their records. The shop owner, who seemed like a decent person, had mentioned that the delivery had been arranged by an attorney, that there was a set delivery date. She'd tracked down the attorney through Sterling Dynamics' own legal department. The attorney had been initially guarded, but when Hannah mentioned that the CEO was asking about it personally, he decided that discretion was no longer the priority. The attorney told her about Charles Sterling's final wishes, about the white flowers that had been prepared 14 months ago and stored at the flower shop, about the letter that was supposed to accompany them, set to be delivered on a specific date, the date when the company would face a specific kind of crisis. How did he know, Hannah asked? How did he know the company would be in crisis on this specific date? He didn't, the attorney said. He just knew Richard Canton, and he knew that given enough time, Richard Canton would reveal himself. Hannah hung up and immediately called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Webb," she said. "This is Hannah Price. I'm Alexandra Harmon's assistant. I'm calling about the flowers." There was a pause on the other end. Hannah could hear a child's voice in the background. "Jacob, maybe, asking a question?" "Yes," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "The flowers were meant for Alexandra," Hannah said. "They were sent by her father. They came with a letter. We'd like you to deliver them again this evening. Would that be possible?" Another pause. Why, Marcus asked. Because Hannah said, "I think the letter explains why, and I think Alexandra needs to read it, and I think she needs to know who delivered the flowers." Marcus thought about this. Hannah could hear him thinking, hear the weight of decision in the silence. "I'll need childcare," Marcus said finally. "That can be arranged," Hannah said. "I'll send a car." Marcus left Jacob with Mrs. Callahan at 6:45 p.m. He pulled a favor, mentioned it was important. And Mrs. Callahan, who had known him long enough to understand that he didn't ask for favors, lightly agreed without asking too many questions. Hannah picked him up in a town car at 7 o'clock. She was younger than he expected, probably early 30s, with the kind of focused professionalism that came from working at high levels. She didn't ask him questions. She just took the bouquet carefully. explained that she'd make sure it reached the right place, and handed him an envelope. "Alexandra asked me to give you this," Hannah said. "It's the letter. It explains things." Marcus took the envelope. His hands were shaking slightly. "Read it," Hannah said, "and then come back tomorrow. Alexandra wants to see you." Alexandra sat in her father's old chair in her own office. The evening had settled into full dark. The building was nearly empty. Security had made their rounds. Most of the staff had gone home hours ago. She held the small ivory envelope, sealed with silver wax, the shield symbol she didn't recognize. She had been staring at it for 3 hours. Finally, at 8:47 p.m., she broke the wax. Her father's handwriting came out in loose, personal script, the same handwriting from notes he'd left her when she was small. Notes that said things like, "I'm proud of you," and "Some days are just for surviving. Tomorrow we'll aim higher." Notes that she'd kept in a shoebox for years, before finally framing them, because she couldn't bear to keep them hidden. The letter read, "Alexandra, if you're reading this, it means the day I hoped would never come has arrived. The day when the company faces the kind of threat that can't be solved with better numbers or smarter strategy. It means Richard Canton has finally revealed what I've always known he is capable of. I want to tell you a story. I was 26 years old. I was driving home from the office one night in rain like the kind that falls in October. I was sure I had made a mistake buying Sterling Dynamics. I was sure I'd made a mistake trying to run it. I was sure I had made mistakes about everything that mattered. I hit black ice outside the city limits. The car went off the road. I sat in that car alone, frightened, convinced I was about to die in a ditch somewhere, that nobody would find me until the morning, that this was how the story ended, with a man who'd tried too hard to hold on to something he never should have had in the first place. Then someone appeared at my window. He was maybe 25 years old, working clothes soaked through with rain. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't ask if I could pay him. He didn't ask if I was important or powerful or worthy of his time. He asked if I was hurt. And when I said no, he helped me reverse the car back onto the road. He stood in the rain while I restarted the engine and drove away. He never gave me his name. I never gave him mine. But he changed something fundamental in how I understood what it meant to be a man. I found out 6 months later that his name was Marcus Webb. I found out that he had filed a compliance report documenting exactly the kind of fraud that Richard has been committing. I found out that Richard had fired him for it. I found out that Marcus had chosen to leave quietly rather than fight, because he had a family that needed him to be steady. I understood then what my own father understood a generation before me. Kindness to a stranger in the rain is not charity. It's a test of what kind of person you are. If Marcus Webb carried those white flowers to you, it means 2 things. It means the day I hoped would never come did come. And it means he is still, after all this time, the kind of man I believed him to be. Trust that. You have not trusted enough of the right things in your life. You have been so busy trying to prove that you could run my company, that you forgot to ask what the company was actually for. You forgot to ask what kind of person you wanted to be while you were running it. I'm telling you now, the company isn't worth keeping if you have to become someone you don't want to be to keep it. Trust people who keep their word when nobody is watching. Trust Marcus Webb. Trust yourself to choose differently. Your father, Charles Sterling. Alexandra set the letter down. She stood and walked to the window. The city below was the city at dusk, ordinary and indifferent, unchanged by the fact that she had just been handed a piece of her father's truth, and found it much heavier than she expected. She thought about the man in the lobby, the damp jacket, the child holding his hand, the flowers he'd protected even while being removed by security. She thought about Richard Canton in her office this morning, confident, unquestioned, planning to sell her father's company to people who would strip it for parts and profit from it, while people like Marcus Webb cleaned their buildings for minimum wage. She thought about how she had let him do it, how she'd been so tired that she hadn't noticed her own company being stolen from inside. She cried then, not dramatically, not the way people cry in movies, but the way a person cries when they understand something they should have understood a long time ago, and can't decide if it's better or worse to finally understand it now. When she was done, she dried her face and called Hannah. "I need you to find him," Alexandra said. "Marcus Webb. I need his phone number, his address, everything. And I need it now." "Already done," Hannah said. "He'll be here tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Marcus arrived on the 45th floor of Sterling Dynamics, and immediately felt like he didn't belong. The office was quiet, good natural light. The kind of space that said, "We spent money on your comfort because we respect what you do here." There was a desk waiting for him, already set up with a laptop and a phone. His name was on a directory placard beside the door. He sat down at the desk and didn't move for 20 minutes. He just sat there, taking in the reality of being in a place that valued him, a place where people had set aside actual resources in anticipation of his arrival. Jacob's penguin drawing was in a small frame on his desk corner, the one he'd made at school last week, where he'd written in careful 6-year-old letters, "Did you know baby penguins make a sound so their parents can recognize them?" Every penguin sounds different. Marcus had framed it because it seemed like the kind of thing you should frame, your child's discovery of the world's strangeness. By 10 a.m., a server error had flagged critical alert on 3 subsystems. By 10:45, Marcus had identified the problem. The corruption was spread across years, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already cost you too much. Someone had been moving things, hiding them, burying the trail so thoroughly that it would take someone who specifically knew what to look for to find it. Marcus had known what to look for. He was explaining the issue to the IT director when the elevator opened. Alexandra stepped out onto the 45th floor. She hadn't planned to come down. She'd planned to stay on 47 and avoid all the places where Marcus Webb might accidentally remind her that she had made a mistake in hiring him, not for his technical skills. Those were undeniable, but because every time she saw him, she thought about her father in the rain, and what her father had trusted her to understand. But the server issue had flagged a critical alert, and Alexandra had made the mistake of coming to see it herself. Now she was standing 10 feet away from him, and he hadn't noticed her yet. He had his hands in his pockets. His voice was quiet. He wasn't performing his intelligence or his competence. He was just existing in the middle of a technical problem, the way other people existed in air. The IT director was listening to him with the particular attention of someone who recognized expertise when they heard it. Alexandra felt something small and stubborn relight in her chest, the same thing she'd felt when she first read her father's letter. Recognition. He looked up. He saw her. He didn't move. Neither did she. "The server is corrupted," he said, because he was a man who defaulted to facts when things became complicated. 3-pronged attack. Someone was deliberately hiding something. Alexandra's throat went dry. She understood what he wasn't saying. She understood that he meant Richard Canton. She understood that her CFO, the man she'd been about to let buy the company out from under her, had been stealing from Sterling Dynamics for years. How long, she asked. "Years," Marcus said. "Maybe longer. Whoever did it thought no one would ever look." "Can you prove it? I'm already documenting," Marcus said. "You'll have something solid by tomorrow." She nodded. She walked closer. Not toward him, toward the server bank, and stood beside him, careful not to look directly at him, careful about distance. She could smell the rain on him. He must have walked from the subway. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Let me prove something first." She left the floor and rode the elevator back to 47. She sat in her father's chair and understood for the first time. That her father hadn't just trusted Marcus to deliver flowers. He had trusted Marcus to save the company. And impossibly, against all odds, he had been right. By Friday afternoon, Richard Canton was suspended pending investigation. Alexandra had called an emergency board session Friday morning. She'd walked in with the server analysis, the compliance documentation, the 3-year record of suppressed reports. She didn't need to say much. The evidence spoke for itself. Richard had tried to explain it away, of course. He'd used words like legitimate strategic initiative and accounting classification methodology, and all the language that powerful men use when they're caught, hoping that enough complexity will confuse the issue. But the numbers didn't lie. The patterns didn't lie. The fact that Marcus's original compliance report from 3 years ago documented exactly the same kind of fraud didn't lie. By 7 p.m., Richard's office had been cleared out by security. By 8 p.m., the outside investor group had formally pulled their acquisition offer. By 9 p.m., Alexandra was standing on the 45th floor. Marcus was still at his desk. He was organizing files, the way careful people do when they've finished something important and don't quite know what comes next. "You didn't tell me you had filed the original report," Alexandra said. He looked up. "I didn't want it to be about me getting vindicated," Marcus said. "I wanted it to be about stopping what was happening." She came closer. She sat on the edge of the desk across from his. "Did you ever think about leaving?" she asked. "After Richard fired you every day," he said. "Every single day for 6 months. What stopped you, Jacob?" he said. He was 4 then. He was small. He needed a father who was steady. Anger wasn't steady. Looking for revenge wasn't steady. So I learned to work 2 jobs and stop thinking about what I lost. Alexandra was very still. "That's not normal," she said finally. "What isn't?" "That kind of restraint. Most people would want someone to know, someone to validate that they were right. I needed Jacob to know I was a man who could lose something and not fall apart," Marcus said. That mattered more than being validated. Alexandra stood up. She didn't say anything else. But as she passed him, she paused for just a half second, long enough that he looked up, long enough that she met his eyes, long enough that something passed between them that didn't need words. Then she went to the elevator. She rode up to the 47th floor and sat in her father's chair and understood why he had loved this man. Enough to spend 3 years setting up a delivery of flowers as a test. It wasn't because Marcus was good. It was because Marcus was the kind of good that didn't require an audience. The following weeks moved with a rhythm that neither of them had planned. Marcus accepted a permanent consulting position at Sterling Dynamics, 2 days per week at first, working on the 45th floor in an office with good natural light, and the kind of respectful treatment that Marcus was still getting used to. Jacob came on school holidays and sat quietly in the corner with his drawing pad, occasionally looking up to show his father something he'd made. The toy car never left his pocket. Professional respect deepened into something neither of them had expected. Conversations that started about server architecture shifted into conversations about trust, about integrity, about what it meant to build something that lasted. Alexandra began changing internal policies around whistleblower protection. She worked with legal to draft new requirements. Documented review within 30 days. Mandatory written response to the person who'd filed. She presented the new policy to the full staff, and then took questions for 40 minutes. The first time any Sterling Dynamics CEO had ever done that. The staff sensed something fundamental shifting in the company culture. It started small. It grew. Marcus's professional file was corrected. The notation about his dismissal was removed and replaced with documentation of his legitimate concern. 3 former colleagues reached out about working with him again. He turned down 2 of them and considered the 3rd carefully. Because he'd learned about the cost of choosing wrong the first time. He continued to work a few shifts at Petals and Stems. He found he liked the smell of that place in the early morning. The way the cold air and the flowers made something that wasn't quite perfume, and wasn't quite the outdoors, but was exactly the smell of a day that hadn't been ruined yet. Alexandra and Marcus began taking lunch together. It started as work-related, reviewing documents, planning changes, discussing the company's future. Gradually, it became something else. They talked about their lives. They talked about their fathers. They talked about the ways that fear and power could twist a person into shapes they didn't recognize. Jacob began initiating invitations. He'd ask his father if they could go get ice cream, and then he'd suggest that Alexandra come along. He'd mention that they were going to the park and ask if she wanted to come. His father would nod, and Alexandra would say yes. And the three of them would become a unit. A man, a woman, and a boy with a toy car in his pocket, moving through the world as if they'd always been meant to be together. Alexandra, for the first time in 14 months, began to feel like she wasn't carrying everything alone. Over 6 weeks, mutual respect transformed into something neither of them had planned, but both began to understand. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't explosive, it was the kind of slow accumulation of moments. That happens when two people stop protecting themselves and start paying attention to each other. They didn't speak it aloud. They didn't need to yet. There was time. Richard Canton's suspension moved toward full termination. The investigation that followed was thorough. It revealed 4 years of fraud suppression. Not just the immediate issue that Marcus had uncovered, but a pattern, a methodology, a deliberate strategy of burying compliance reports and intimidating whistleblowers into silence. Marcus's original report from 3 years ago became Exhibit A in the investigation. It documented everything. It was precise. It was damning. The federal investigators who came to interview Marcus in a quiet conference room on the 46th floor asked him the same questions over and over, looking for inconsistencies, looking for places where his story might fracture. It didn't. Every detail matched. Every timeline aligned. Every technical notation in his original report proved correct. 2 board members who had been aligned with Richard's position resigned. They understood that the investigation was going to unfold fully, and they wanted to distance themselves before the full scope of what had happened became public knowledge. The legal department drafted charges. External investigators brought in evidence. Media outlets in Boston began picking up the story. Sterling Dynamics executive faces federal fraud charges, the headlines read. 4-year pattern of fraud suppression uncovered. Another announced. Whistleblower's original report validated after years of suppression. A third one stated. Marcus became a reluctant celebrity in the story, though Alexandra protected his privacy as much as she could. She gave interviews to journalists and emphasized the integrity of the employee who had come forward. She made it clear that Richard Canton had acted alone, but that the company bore responsibility for not creating a culture where whistleblowers were safe. The media loved that. The idea of a CEO taking responsibility. The idea of a woman young enough to have been born after her father founded the company, stepping into power and immediately beginning to dismantle the systems of protection. That had allowed fraud to flourish. Jacob saw his father's name in the news. The newspaper mentioned it only in passing, protected the boy's identity completely. But Jacob recognized the name and understood something important had happened. "Is Daddy in trouble?" he asked Marcus one evening. "No, buddy," Marcus said. "Daddy did the right thing a long time ago, and now people are understanding that, even though it was hard, especially because it was hard," Marcus said. Jacob nodded, satisfied with this answer, and went back to his drawing. Alexandra reached out to Marcus about a week into the investigation. She asked if they could have lunch, just the 2 of them. Hannah watched Jacob at the office. They went to the same small restaurant where they'd sat that first day and didn't know what to say to each other. "Your father," Alexandra said. "Your real father. He must have been proud." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "He died when I was young," he said finally. "I was 9. But yes, I think he would have been proud. He raised me to value truth over comfort. I'm just now understanding how much that cost him." Alexandra stirred her coffee. Not drinking it, just moving the spoon in circles. "My father left me more than a company," she said. "He left me a test. I'm finally passing it." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. It was such a simple gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. Spring arrived in stages, the way it does in Boston. Tentatively at first, then with more confidence, then with the full commitment of a season that had finally decided to show up. Alexandra made a decision. There was a small garden on the company's ground floor terrace. It was overlooked, the kind of space that most employees didn't know existed. She decided to replant it. She chose white flowers for the border. She was done pretending she hated them. The dedication for the replanting was framed as a memorial for Charles Sterling. Alexandra planned it carefully, not a big corporate event, but something smaller, something more personal. Grace Whitman, who had stood by her through the hardest months. Hannah, a few board members who had stayed loyal through the difficult times. Some of the staff who had worked for her father. And Marcus, with Jacob. Saturday morning in April. The kind of morning in New England where you can feel the city waking up around you. The kind of morning where the sun is tentative, not quite committed to warmth, but trying. Jacob dressed himself that morning in a button-down shirt that was slightly too big, and his good sneakers. He insisted on carrying his toy car in his shirt pocket. Some things were non-negotiable. When they arrived at the terrace, Jacob looked at the white flowers along the border. Then at the table in the center where a fresh bouquet had been placed, white and dense, tied with a blue ribbon, just like the one from 2 months ago. Alexandra stood beside the table. She was wearing something lighter than she usually wore to company events. Less armor, more person. She looked different. She looked like someone who had decided to stop protecting herself from things that might be worth the risk. She looked at Jacob with complete seriousness. "Are you going to keep them this time?" the boy asked. It was such a simple question, but it contained the entire story within it. The rejection, the fear, the distance, the choice she was making right now. Alexandra picked up the bouquet and held it. She held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of it, understanding what it represented. She looked at Marcus over Jacob's head. "Yes," she said, "I'm going to keep them this time." But she was looking at Marcus when she said it. Marcus's hand was on Jacob's shoulder. The boy looked up at him, seeking confirmation that this moment was what they had come for. Marcus nodded slightly. Permission. Acknowledgement. The quiet pride of a man who had taught his son to tell the truth when it cost something, and who had somehow, against all the ordinary logic of a rainy Tuesday morning 3 months ago, found his way to the one place where that had mattered. "Can we get lunch after?" Jacob asked. "Something hot," Marcus said, as if this was an old ritual between them. "Something hot," Jacob confirmed. He looked at Alexandra. "Do you want to come?" Alexandra stood in the April sun, holding her father's flowers, watching a man and a boy who had taught her something fundamental about who she actually wanted to be. "Yes," she said. "I'll come." Marcus didn't look back as they walked down the path. He didn't need to. He could feel her watching them. He could feel her choosing to follow. Behind them, Alexandra set the flowers in front of the framed photograph of her father. The one from before the company got too large, and he got too tired. The one where he was laughing at something off camera, She looked like the man she sometimes forgot he had been. She placed her hand on the frame. "I understand now," she said quietly to the photograph. "I finally understand what you are asking me to do." She stood there for a moment. Then she turned and walked down the path to follow them. The restaurant was small, the kind of place that had good coffee, and didn't judge people who came in wet from rain or carrying toy cars in their pockets. Jacob ordered hot chocolate with extra foam. Marcus ordered coffee. Alexandra ordered the same thing Marcus ordered, then seemed surprised by her own choice. They sat in a corner booth. Jacob drew on the napkin with a crayon the waiter brought without being asked. He was drawing something. It might have been a flower, might have been the building, might have been this moment itself, translated into lines and colors and childhood understanding. Marcus and Alexandra sat across from each other. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to yet. But there was a quality to the silence. Not empty, but full. The kind of silence that comes when two people have finally understood the same thing at the same time. Jacob looked up from his drawing. "My dad says kindness is a choice," he said, in the matter-of-fact way of children delivering truths that adults had forgotten. Alexandra looked at Marcus. "He says that she asked." Jacob continued patient and serious. "Some people are kind when people are watching. Some people are kind when nobody's watching. Those people, he says, are the ones you can actually trust with important things." Marcus was looking at Jacob with that particular expression, the complete undivided attention that had first caught Alexandra's eye in security footage. Weeks ago, in a moment she hadn't fully understood, the quality of presence that had nothing to do with proximity and everything to do with genuine interest in the person in front of him. She understood now. He wasn't just a father. He was a witness to his child's becoming. He was a man who had taught his son that integrity was something you performed alone, in the dark, where no one would ever give you credit for it. And he had done it because that was who he actually was, not because anyone was watching. Alexandra picked up her coffee. "You're right," she said to Jacob. "Those are the people you can trust." She looked at Marcus. "Thank you for that." Marcus nodded. He didn't say, "You're welcome." He didn't say, "I hope we can build something here." He said, "You're going to make different choices now, aren't you?" "I am," Alexandra said. And Jacob will see that Marcus said. He'll understand what it means when a person chooses to change. Something settled in Alexandra's chest. Not resolution, just the clear understanding that she had been given a second chance, and she was going to spend it carefully. The sun came through the restaurant window and caught the edge of her coffee cup, making it glow amber. Outside, the city continued its indifferent motion. Inside, a man, a boy, and a woman sat in a booth and understood, without needing to say it, that they had just changed the shape of each other's remaining years. Jacob went back to his drawing. The toy car sat on the table, a small red object that had witnessed everything, that traveled everywhere, that meant home to a child. Marcus reached over and took Alexandra's hand, just for a moment. Just long enough. Then he let go and went back to his coffee. She looked at their hands where they had touched. "Someday," she said quietly, "I'm going to tell you everything my father understood about you. Everything he saw in you that made him believe you were worth this." Marcus looked at her. "I don't think he was ever wrong about people," he said. "I think he was wrong about a lot of things, but about people, about seeing what was actually there." He paused. "He was never wrong." Alexandra didn't look away. "Neither was I," she said. "About you." 3 months later, Richard Canton faced federal charges for securities fraud and a deliberate pattern of obstruction of justice. Marcus was the key witness in the case, and he never backed down under cross-examination. The prosecution built an airtight case using his original compliance report and his testimony. Canton eventually accepted a plea deal: 3 years in federal prison, mandatory restitution to Sterling Dynamics, and permanent banning from executive positions in any publicly traded company. Sterling Dynamics settled a class action lawsuit brought by other suppressed whistleblowers, awarding compensation to 17 employees who had been fired or intimidated for reporting fraud over the years. The company implemented a new ethics framework that became a model for corporate accountability in the region. Alexandra appeared on business news channels discussing the changes, and her reputation shifted from ruthless CEO to CEO who chose integrity. Her father's legacy was finally protected, preserved not through defensive business strategy, but through honest reckoning with what had gone wrong and genuine commitment to doing better. Marcus accepted a permanent position as senior consultant for corporate ethics at Sterling Dynamics. He worked 2 days per week alongside Alexandra, developing policies and training programs, ensuring that future whistleblowers would have safe channels and genuine protection. Jacob came to the office on school holidays and sat quietly in his corner, drawing. The toy car never left his pocket. 1 year later, Alexandra and Marcus were together in a way that mattered. Quiet, steady, unhurried. The product of months of shared choices and growing trust. They took Jacob to a botanical garden where white flowers bloomed naturally in spring. The boy pointed them out with quiet satisfaction, understanding in his way that he had planted a seed metaphorically, had watched it grow in the adults around him. Justice, they understood, wasn't about revenge. It was about choosing different, and the 3 of them had chosen it together. They walked through the garden, father, son, and woman who had learned to see what her father had always known, that the world was full of quiet, good people, people who did the right thing when nobody was watching, people like Marcus Webb. The toy car stayed in Jacob's pocket. The white flowers bloomed in every direction. And somewhere in the city, in an office on the 47th floor, a photograph of Charles Sterling smiled down on the company that was finally beginning to understand what he had always tried to teach. That kindness was more valuable than profit. That integrity was more powerful than power itself. And that sometimes the smallest gesture, a flower delivered in the rain, a card sealed with silver wax, a hand reached out to help a stranger, could change the entire shape of a life. The 3 of them sat on a bench in the garden, Jacob between his father and Alexandra, the red toy car in his small hand, white flowers blooming all around them. And in that moment, in the soft light of a spring afternoon, they understood something that few people ever learn, that the greatest things in life are built on the smallest acts of integrity. That trust once earned through nothing but your character is the most precious thing you can possess. And that sometimes, if you're brave enough to do the right thing when it costs you everything, you might just find that doing so costs you nothing at all. Because in the end, you get back far more than you ever gave. You get a life that means something. You get a man like Marcus, a child like Jacob, a woman like Alexandra. And you get white flowers blooming in a garden every spring, a reminder that even the hardest winters can give way to renewal, to growth, to the possibility of beauty emerging from the darkest times. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to Marcus and Alexandra's story. A story about what happens when someone finally chooses to do the right thing, and what it costs, and what it's worth. If you found this powerful, please subscribe our channel for more stories like this. Stories about quiet courage. Stories about integrity. Stories about the power of choosing differently. Thank you.